Hello everybody. As I said in the Ultra Kill video, I did have a Halloween video planned. Now, unfortunately, it's not me playing a scary game, but doing something else. I am a fan of analog horror, so to speak. Niche genre, but it is something that I like. And so, I thought I'd rank them. I'm not ranking all of them. These aren't all the ones that I've seen. I just picked 15. I thought maybe about going for 20, but I couldn't get to 20. Most other series that aren't these ones have some form of issue. They're either like, there's not enough content for me to really rate it, or I just couldn't find it. Some of these are kind of, well, not some of these, but some are kind of obscure. So, if you have one that you don't see me rank today, but would love to know my thoughts on, you are more than welcome to leave a comment below. Also didn't do any like one-off, so the boiled one is not going to be here because it's one video, even though it's not that bad. I just want to do series. I want to do a series that have a substantial amount of content, enough for me to rank, obviously, and ones that I could find. Obviously, finding new series other than these are a little difficult for me personally. But I think we have a pretty good selection here. We got 15 to rank. Some of these are decently popular. Mandela Catalog, Walton Files. Speaking of the pictures, I didn't... most of these actually come from another tier list. I just didn't want to look for all of them. But some of these I did have to get on my own. That being said, let's get right into it. These are ordered, so like, I'll give an example here. If it's like this... and this, that is insinuating this is better than this one. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. So, we're just going to go, try to go from bottom to top. Just kind of get better as we go. So, that means we must start with the worst. Now, what is the worst one on this list? In my opinion, it's Angel Hair. Now, we will talk about this in a second, obviously. But in my opinion, Angel Hair is the worst analog horror, simply for the fact that it's not scary. And it's not even really trying to be. It was kind of in the beginning. It had that moment where it was saying, insinuating that maybe Gabby murdered the main character's dad. But then they kind of get off that plot point and they don't really mention it again. And at another point in the series, they're like, how do they talk to the screen? The character goes, do you care about that, or do you just care about getting your friend back? And the main character goes, yeah, I guess I don't care. And then they never bring it up again. There are interesting things that they could have done, but they chose not to. Now, I want to make a very clear distinction here. Angel Hair is not a terrible series. We're just ranking these based on an analog horror aspect. And in the horror aspect, it is objectively the worst. And in my opinion, that's the most important thing we're talking about here, right? It's got to scare you. It's a horror series. It's the whole point of it, right? Now, let's get the obvious one out of the way. Urban Spook. I said Angel Hair is not trying to be an analog horror. Urban Spook is trying a little too hard, I suppose. Obvious issues with it. The warnings at the beginning that are like, it's filled with disturbing content. And you know what? To be fair, Urban Spook is disturbing, but it is nothing else but disturbing. It doesn't have any substance. There's no interesting aspect to it. It's not scary. It's not mysterious. It's not interesting. It's shock value for the sake of shock value. The concept is actually pretty decent, though. I will give it that. Compared to the rest of these using maybe more religious themes or maybe supernatural themes or extraterrestrials like Local 58, Cosmic like Local 58 Gemini, or maybe extraterrestrial like Kind of Smile, I guess. That was a bit confusing. It went for a more realistic approach. It went for the fact that there was a murderer going around and they were, doing these things. But the issue is that it just doesn't execute well on it. There are plenty of issues. There are plenty of videos on this. So I'll just go over the number one issues. Putting "this is the painting" before every single image that is supposed to be scary makes them not scary because you know it's going to happen. As I said earlier, it's just disturbing, and there's a lot of things that are just shocking for the sake of being shocking. If you've watched the series, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. Overall, it's just not as good as anything else on this list, if I'm being perfectly honest. Let's get to the next one. They'll go to The Bat. First D tier of the ranking session. Might be a little controversial. I know there are people that like this, but I don't personally. I find there are plenty of issues with it. Number one being that, it's called The Bat. We got this thumbnail. You'd think that he'd be a very prominent figure, but you just don't get that feeling overall. It talks about other members of the Justice League, talks about, investigations on it. There's one video where it was like a commercial interrupted by the Court of Owls, but overall, it doesn't even feel like the Bat's a main character, even though the series is named after him. And so it just ends up feeling a bit all over the place, right? We go, in the most recent episode that I can remember, they're talking about Azrael and how he killed one of the Robins, and the Bat doesn't even really appear in any of it. So he just doesn't even feel like a character, and it's the namesake of it. I don't think the concept is terrible, but evil Batman is fine. I just don't think it was done very well. Number two, it's a frustrating watching experience. Number one, because the text is so fast. It'll appear on screen for 1 second. You're supposed to read 3 sentences. So you just end up constantly pausing to read what is being on screen. And hidden text is nothing new. I think almost all of these series have things that appear on screen for a second, right? But it's just everything. It's the basic story elements that are on screen for 1 second. You got to keep pausing and pausing just to understand what's going on. Results in a rather frustrating viewing experience, in my opinion. We will move on up with the Smile tapes. Really wasn't a great fan of this one either. At least easier to watch than The Bat, but that's not a high bar. Issue here is once again just the concept is essentially zombies, but they smile, which another issue is that they're not scary. A lot of them just remind me of that one Germa meme where he's smiling like that. Half of the images just look like that. And another one, it kind of reminds me of Urban Spook, where it just feels like it's trying a bit hard, putting a lot of blood on the screen with the repeating voices and all that. And later on in the series, they introduce variants to the disease, right? And they use that, but they're never used anywhere. Variant C isn't used at all. It's just used to scare you for a little bit. Hey, I'll admit it got me a little bit, but that's it. That's all it's used for. The variant doesn't come up again. And then variant B comes up because later on they think maybe they can make a cure out of it because it's one where they don't show any symptoms, right? And they seem to have recovered from it. But then she just dies. The person who has the variant just dies. And the ending is that, there's these bright lights that descend upon the city. There's this flash. And then there's somebody talking about how they survived the apocalypse, so to speak, right? And it just ends up being confusing. And the story feels very incoherent, I suppose is the best way to say it. Almost as if it's trying to do too many things at once. The one thing I can respect Smile for, though, is that it ended. Ended at a perfectly... It ended, is the thing. I think a lot of series here could have benefited from that. Alright, let's move on to the next one. I'm going to go for Children Under the House in C tier. This one is actually kind of interesting. It's more of a technical analog horror because it all takes place on VHS, but the actual story itself takes place on paper. Paper, pencil, crayons, etc. It gives it a more unique aesthetic, I guess is the word. But this one is a lot more about the story. It's a lot more about the events. And similarly to Smile, does have that beginning and ending part. A decently satisfying ending, I might add. I think the twist is fine. Maybe a little obvious is, I guess spoiler alerts. The owners are kind of the only characters left for you to actually be shocked about because you can remember that they exist, right? So you, so this one is all right. Once again, it's a bit more of a technical analog horror, but it counts. And I mean, we can get really semantical about a lot of this, to be honest. So I think it's good to include it. I think it's a fine series, to be honest. Moving on to the next one, I'm going to go for the Baddington FNAF tapes. These are based off of the ones that Squimpus McGrimpus did. I think they're okay. The beginning is very much... I don't want to say they're full copies, because, the creator does try to change it up a little bit, so that you're not just watching the exact same video. I do commend the models. I really like them, to be honest. They feel very good as realistic models, in the way that, like, you could see them being children's entertaining robots, right? Because there's a lot of them that try to, like, go too far into the scary aspect, and so it just kind of becomes a bit unrealistic. And I respect the Baddington, it didn't do that. Now, to be fair, I did just talking about realistic, but I would be remiss to not mention not the newest episode, because that one's the 3-minute one, but the horror attraction, the one that's 27 minutes. Really just not a huge fan of that. The insinuations are just weird, because it's like, okay, so William Afton, like, took a person to an alternate dimension where he's keeping them in a time loop. And listen, I know FNAF is no stranger to supernatural things, but the issue is it just doesn't, I don't know, it felt more normal, more FNAF supernatural up to that point, right? Yeah, there's the ghosts that, they possess the animatronics. You got that. You got William Afton being alive after being spring-locked. But that's all normal FNAF stuff. But William Afton being a Time Lord... Listen, I don't know the current FNAF lore. Maybe he is a Time Lord. I don't know for sure. But I'd be willing to bet that's maybe a bit extreme. So that was my really... It was so far my only issue with the Baddington series so far. Otherwise, it's alright. As I said, earlier episodes feel like a bit of a copy, but the later episodes really don't have this issue, and as I said earlier, they are a little more unique. Moving on next, we have White Stag Entertainment. I decently liked this one. It's short and sweet, only 5 episodes. Really liked the, felt more... I don't know how to say this. It's cheap in that charming way, I guess is the best way to say it. Especially with the 5th episode. But overall, I really liked the concept. And I really like when an analog horror series tries to, make make the horror more normal, as if it's a normal part of life. And I think White Stag is the first one on this list to maybe do it. Like, a lot of these are like freak events, right? Or like, this is like a sudden thing. The bat just appears all of a sudden, the smile of disease appears all of a sudden. But with White Stag, there's education warning against these monsters, telling them they've prepared for it with these false trails and the maps and everything. It makes it feel better because it feels more lived in. It feels like they've been dealing with this for a while, and it feels like they know what they're going to do about it. And honestly, I really like that. It gives a bit of more of a realistic feeling, a bit more of a lived-in feeling. And I really like that about some analog horror series. So now we are... Actually, we're going to move up to the B tier. We're going to start with Local 58. This is a very original one. Predates any of these. And what can I say? It's pretty good. Overall, I really like the story. Once again, most videos are short and sweet. There is that half-hour video that is almost nothing. Not a huge fan of that. But overall, most of them are fine. I think it has a very interesting premise. I think it executes very well. Overall, there's not much to say. It's just, honestly, it's just good. Just very good. I like the story. I like the newer episodes. Yeah, it's just pretty good. Next up, we're gonna go for Gemini, if it'll let me put it there. Jeez. I feel like these two are pretty similar in a way. With Gemini Home Entertainment being about that news station. This also being similar, well, less of a news station, more home entertainment, but I think Gemini has a much more interesting story. I think the story is very much a plus of Gemini home entertainment. I like, once again, there's stuff that makes it feel a bit more lived in, with all the videos and all of the technological advancements, all the world building. It's a good amount of content too. 19 videos, each about 5 minutes each, so I really like that. Some series, analog horror series, can tend to only have a few episodes, which can be a bit dissatisfying. But overall, I think Gemini is really nice. Hope to see more out of it. Now we go to probably my favorite, or at least one of my favorites. Maybe not the best compared to these, but I really like it, to be honest. I like the premise. I really love the execution. Very interesting story. My only criticism would be that whenever it goes to like a video with real people, it's not amazing. Especially the newest one with that smiling guy. Just kind of remind me of Smile, where it just reminds me of the meme. Therefore, it's just not scary when they do that is the issue. Rather, it just makes me laugh, which is not exactly the reaction that you want. Alright, now before we move on to the A tier, I do see that I actually forgot to rank this one. I would put this, probably put it here. I don't think it's amazing. I really wish it was continuing, because as it stands right now, it has a really unsatisfying ending. But the creator doesn't want to make it anymore, and I can respect that. However, I have to rate them as I see them, I think concept is actually decently interesting, but very little feels explained, I guess, is the thing. And obviously, when you're talking about horror, you don't want to explain everything, especially because you want to keep a bit of a fear of the unknown, but relatively, it just feels very, I don't know. I guess the best way I could describe Man in the Suit is that it just feels like things constantly happen, right? Like, Godzilla does this incident, and then there's another incident, and then there's like 4 throughout the series, and it just feels like the company doesn't do anything to try to hinder it, right? And I can understand that maybe you might consider that very realistic, but it just feels like they gotta be doing more. I just feel like you can't ignore this. It was all I could think about during it. So, I really didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would, unfortunately. It's not bad, though. No. I think, like, this C and B tier, I enjoy all of these series. They just all kind of have flaws with them. They have aspects with them. Or maybe they're just, maybe like with Bass but Local 58, they're just not, they're good, but they're not as good as other ones. So now we do get into the ones I was talking about. These are the best ones, in my opinion. Obviously, we're going to start with the Mandela catalog. Obviously, maybe the one that you probably know. I think it's very, very good. Plenty of content. Definitely one of the longer ones, I think, on this list, which I, of course, enjoy. Yeah, great story, in my opinion. Very much good amount of rewatchability, noticing new details. I can really appreciate that about a series. Of course, originating this goddamn face, which I would hold against it, because, as I said, it feels more like an originator. It feels like this series did it and then everybody else did it, which, I give it a pass on this one, even if that is a rather ridiculous face. But I really like it. I really like the animation they had in Volume 5, the newer ones. I really like that, to be honest. Overall, great series, in my opinion. And it's nice that I'm pretty sure there is more coming out of it. Next up, I would put The Walton Files. A lot of the same things with the Mandela catalog. Especially, I love the aesthetic, because a lot of it is actually animated. And I'm sure that takes a lot of work, and as I said, it's really good. There's a lot of content, too. And there's even more coming out, because Apparently there's episode 5 and 6, and they're going to be about an hour long, at least according to the community post. Can't wait for that. But overall, lots of content, lots of good content, I think. Overall, all the episodes, in my opinion, are pretty good. As I said, similar to the Mandela Catalog and Gemini, there's a lot of rewatchability, noticing those little details, noticing new things that maybe you didn't notice before. So there's that aspect. I really like that aspect about a lot of good analog horrors, that you can rewatch, notice new things. Yeah. Now we will move on to the A+ tier. These are the cream of the crop. These are the best ones. Vita Carney. Very good series in my opinion. Very scary, which is obviously something important for this. Loving the story. Loving the progression. I love the more practical, similarly to what I mentioned earlier with White Stag. It's got a bit of a cheap but charming vibe, especially with certain episodes maybe a bit more noticeable than others. I love the new introductions. I like that we got to see an elder mimic. It was very nice. Got some nice imagery, disturbing imagery, and some substance to back it up, just in case you thought I was being a bit hypocritical there. Overall, I think it's a really good series. It actually got me with that one scene with the mimic in its documentary. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you've watched it, and if you don't, you should go watch it and then come back here. And then number one, feel like the obvious pick, but still a good pick, is Greylock. Undoubtedly great. Story's great. Really love the progression. Obviously the scariest on this list, in my opinion. Opening your subconscious is probably the best analog horror episode I've ever seen. Some contenders, but honestly not much, is really, really good. I just wish I knew if there was more coming out of it, because it has been away for a while. Not 100% sure if it's canceled, but I doubt that it is. I acknowledge these episodes take a while. I mean, opening your subconscious was an hour, so if there's another episode like that similarly coming out, then obviously it's going to take time, take effort, and I would obviously prefer if they take their time to make a really good one. Overall, I don't imagine there's many controversial picks with this list. Maybe, Man in the Suit and the Bat might be slightly controversial. You might think they should be higher or lower. Would love to discuss with you. Once again, leave a comment below. Love to talk about any of these, or any ones that I didn't rate that you might be curious about my opinion on, or just recommend me new series that I can maybe rank in the future. But, for now, that's all for today. Hope you have a good day.